as a sometimes active and sometimes falling off the ball teaching assistant in many classes this year, I totally dropped the ball on many of forgetting to record. I also am clearly struggling this evening with my Zoom background. So thank you all for bearing with me through the tech issues as we talk about the power of technology. But thank you so much, Stephen, for having us. It's an honor to participate alongside such incredible panelists and speak to this issue of urgency, but also great opportunity. My name is Charlie Hoffs, and I use she, her pronouns. I'm a current junior undergraduate student at Stanford and co-lead and co-founder of the youth-led organization Unbox, working to address food insecurity and food injustice in the US through data analysis, policy advocacy, and community engagement, which has been a learning journey over the past over a year now, from which I've learned so much from incredible individuals like Hope and Christine, and can't wait to have this conversation tonight and learn more alongside all of you.
And I'm Hope Miranda. I use she, they pronouns. I'm a volunteer as a data advisor with DataKind SF, and I am supporting the Unbox project. And during the day, I'm a data scientist with Glowforge.
Hi, everyone. My name is Christine Tran. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the executive director of the Los Angeles Food Policy Council. I wear many hats to be in this position, including I'm a doctoral student at the University of Washington, finishing up hopefully my dissertation this year. But I'm a mixed methods researcher by training through that program. And I'm also a freelance writer. So for me, telling stories is data. And so how do we connect those dots to really visualize what some of the data, what it tells us. And I feel like conversations like these helps us and inspire us in so many different ways. So I'm just really excited for this conversation and to be in community with everyone here.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Those are great intros, and we're all really excited to be sitting down tonight with all of y'all. It's going to be such a great time. To the listeners, if there are any questions at any time, the setup is going to be 30-40 minutes of Q&A with the panelists, and then around 10 to 20 minutes at the end of attendee questions. So if you just want to type those out in the chat, we'll be able to get to those by the end of the meeting. But starting with the pre-prepped questions, first question going to Charlie. I was kind of curious if you could dive in a little bit about Unbox and how that's informed your views on food scarcity.
Our work over the past year has been trying to understand how we can best partner with other organizations to best empower dignified food access for every American to nutritional, affordable, equitable, sustainable food. And really just to dive right into the weeds of the first keyhole issue we plugged into that helped us plug into this issue and best kind of try to find our way and being most impactful was the relative inability at the outset of COVID-19 to use food stamps to order groceries online for delivery. It was 2020, it was a global pandemic. How could this service not be available to every American on whatever platform they wanted to use benefits to order groceries online for delivery? So the particular first program we explored was the SNAP online purchasing pilot, an innovative USDA program that would allow SNAP participants to use their EBT cards to purchase groceries online for curbside pickup or delivery, and had the incredible opportunity to participate and play our very small part in exploring and observing the expansion of this program nationwide over the course of the pandemic, seeing how many lives it touched and how it expanded food access during COVID-19. So it was really through first working to advocate on behalf of the equitable expansion of the SNAP online purchasing pilot that we connected with advocacy organizations elevating the voices of SNAP participants and their unique challenges in accessing affordable food in rural areas, that we were able to speak with researchers, mapping out access gaps in food apartheids and low food access areas, to working directly with SNAP participants amongst our community to best understand what ways that needs are being underserved by a pretty nascent program with a lot of room for improvement. I just dove right into the weeds there on what are kind of the lenses we first jumped into. But it was from there that we had the opportunity to learn more and engage deeper with the SNAP program at large and explore, oh my gosh, the incredible barriers that so many different demographics face in accessing the largest anti-hunger program in the US. So it's been a learning journey and spawned a lot of different projects and partnerships, but that is where we're still learning from at this point.
Yeah, really cool. I'm kind of hoping maybe you could speak a little bit more to those partnerships. You work with Charlie fairly closely.
Yeah, one of their major partners is No Kid Hungry, which is cool because they, one, provide a lot of public data for how their money is used, and they have like a lot more boots on the ground with just getting information to the right people and making sure no kid goes hungry. And they stepped it up pretty hard during the pandemic. As Charlie was talking about SNAP, I wanted to add some numbers in case folks aren't super familiar with SNAP benefits. But the average SNAP benefit in 2019, I don't want to use 2020 numbers because it's going to be very skewed with the pandemic. But for 2019, the average was $129 per month. So if y'all can think of how many groceries you can get with $129 a month, can always try to improve these benefits. The other thing is that SNAP benefits are, you qualify based on a federal poverty level salary amount. So imagine living in California where the cost of living is so much higher than the median cost of living in America, and you are being compared to this federal poverty level in order to use these benefits or qualify for these benefits. So as you can imagine, a lot more people who need help aren't able to get the help from specific social services, and instead have to look for food banks or other local resources that are not federally supported.
Awesome. Thanks so much for filling in those little technical details. Christine, how were you seeing COVID affecting the city of LA, and how is that informing kind of your idea of food scarcity?
Yeah, I feel like as a city, we're about 4 million, and as a county, we're about 10. So those are really big numbers. The country of Denmark is about 5 million. So just if we think about numbers in that way, it does feel like a lot. But then there's other types of numbers, knowing that how do we understand numbers as it relates to jurisdictions and political lines. And the thing about LA City is we have 15 council districts. And in addition to the 15 council districts, we also have neighborhood councils. And so I feel like LA as a city and LA as a county, we have so many different layers. And so those layers are connected to funding. They're connected to so many resources. And at the end of the day, everyone has a self-interest going after the same pot of money. And so everyone's trying to make their case, and it ends up being sometimes a Shark Tank competition. You have scarce resources and everyone's saying, hey, I need this. And data comes in and everyone can use data to back up their story, because guess what? We do need better social services. We do need better housing. We do need better food access, and they're all interconnected. It's not like we can separate one thing from another. And hope for you to mention like how much you actually get a month. That's not nearly enough. And so our answers are not necessarily in one area, like we need to invest all in one. It's really a menu of services, right? A menu of options. So if you are on CalFresh and you don't have enough food benefits, you can go to a food bank, you can go to your local church and figure out how to get your next meal. And I feel like sometimes when we think about things from a policy perspective, we don't actually think about it from the individual's perspective looking for food. And so I'm really about applying concepts and data like user experience research. UX should be used in policy, and it's not. And so I'm a huge advocate of really cross-pollinating so that we can actually tell this narrative of what LA is about.
Christine, thank you so much for sharing that. As a born and raised former LA resident, grew up in the LA USD food system. Thank you so much for your work on behalf of LA residents and families and kids. I just wanted to just jump in and ask you more about what organizing and people power through numbers looks like in LA on food policy. Just like I'm coming off this week of, it's been a big week of organizing on behalf of SNAP for college students. And I realized we kind of jumped right into acronyms, SNAP being the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, the largest anti-hunger program in the US that supports almost 42 million Americans. And just such a crucial part of the social safety net. And it's so difficult for college students to access this program. It was before COVID, and then in January, eligibility expanded, allowed 3 more million college students across the US to be eligible, and all that's going to sunset right after COVID ends. So this week, we've been visiting Congress people across California and across the country, but trying to mobilize our zip codes here. Just like LA is so diverse and so big. Like what does it look like to mobilize numbers strategically around issues when you have those, like, you gotta like play the lines of districts the right way and the messaging?
Yeah, I think there's just a lot, but I think to your point of organizing students, first and foremost, I feel like when you're a constituent and you have that unifying identity, that's power right there. One of the biggest issues, as you mentioned, Charlie, is how qualification works for college students. I just want to put it out there that the classification of how college students are defined through financial aid, through public health, public benefit services, is not very realistic to the lives of actual students. So you have students who, for the first time because of COVID, they wanted to leave home because they might have some issues with domestic violence or home issues, and they wanted to leave, and going to college, getting financial aid, living in the dorms would be a chance for something new. And this concept of how a child, a college student, is tied to their parents actually disrupts the ability for a college student with untraditional lived experiences to access some of these benefits. And a lot of the complexity with policy is the version of a college student that most people have is a very heteronormative, upper middle class type of perspective, where you go through school, you get into college, and when you leave the nest, you go into college, but that nest is sometimes not even there. And so I feel like even the way people contribute their definition to what a college student is makes it very problematic. One of my favorite quotes is from my mentor. Her name's Dara Cooper. People who are able to define the problems also can define its solutions. And the people closest to these problems are the populations that are impacted. And so we often call lived experiences impacted people. Those impacted narratives are never really the center. It's almost like it's the target, right? But who's doing the targeting and who is, benefiting from it is the question. And so those are some complexities that I feel like data has a big role in playing, and as it intersects with advocacy, how do we redefine these terms so that we are not in this place of categorizing everyone in one singular box?
Yeah, that lived experience. I had to be essentially legally emancipated from my parents in order to qualify for food stamps while in college because of just, bad situation. And the amount of time between going through that whole process and then actually getting the access to food stamps was multiple months. And having that lived experience, I actually don't know how I can apply that to, advocating for policy other than sharing like, hey, this is totally a normalized experience. I was definitely not the only one. Many of my peers asked me, oh, how were you able to do that? Or where do you use your food stamps? And I think that if we can normalize that experience more and share out these stories, I feel like personally that's the best thing I can do, because, and obviously look at the data and share the data. But I don't know how I could use that for driving policy. So maybe y'all have ideas, maybe you have people I can talk to, but it's definitely close to my heart.
I think you're already doing it. I feel like the first step is to figure out what our stories are. Sometimes I come from the space with lived experiences too. I came from a CalFresh household. I was a WIC baby. I went to Head Start. I'm the product of what folks want out of these social service investments, but it didn't really capture the fact that my mom worked in sweatshops and that my dad was a data laborer and I'm a first gen student. And so, but it took me a while to actually learn about how to tell my story. And one of the goals that I have for the LA Food Policy Council is how can we tell stories? And from a research context, it's qualitative data. How do we tell stories in a non-extractive way? And for me, the best way is to empower those with those lived experiences to have the agency to tell those stories, because we are able to redefine definitions. Definitions are not permanent. It's my favorite thing about, and I'm a total social scientist, but everything is a social construct. Everything is a social construct. So if something is wrong or doesn't work, we can fix it. It's not the end all be all, but unfortunately our systems are so archaic sometimes. And sometimes people in powers of positions are privileged folks without the lived experiences. And so the best way for me to kind of transform thinking is to level that playing field. And if folks from within are not coming at this from lived experiences, how do we amplify our voice loud enough to be that squeaky wheel so that people do take note? And so I think the things that we do, sometimes we have to kind of pause and reflect and say that we are doing the things that we want, but hopefully a year from now, we'll be in a different place. Or more people will hear these narratives. And so I think time is also another factor that we often don't think about when it comes to change. And for me as a data person, that T1, T2 is such an important concept of figuring out that dimension of data that I think most people tend to ignore. And we actually treat data and numbers as being so static sometimes. And I think we can break that mold of thinking too. And coming from an education world, there's these two concepts that I'll share. One is fixed mindsets and growth mindsets. And I think when you apply these concepts into data, fixed concepts are like static, right? And the growth mindset is how can we look at the numbers differently? And so if someone does a research study and it didn't prove to have any statistical significance, it's not a wash. It might not be great for publishers, but there's still learning to be had from it. So being able to actually have conversations like this helps us unpack things a little bit more.
Thank you both so much for sharing from your own experience, and then just the way larger story that each of these experiences is a puzzle piece within. I think that the most kind of breakthrough moments that we've had in our organizing have been, we're all talking about an issue and then we zoom out and say, wait, that was last year. I was like having a really hard time with that, or I was rejected, or my friend, I remember him waiting in line for hours to receive assistance on putting through the CalFresh application. And I think that a huge barrier for those conversations to take place is the stigma and kind of self-doubt and lack of recognition too around those being actual issues of food insecurity. It's, you know, and when we're speaking with congressional staffers, you can see the moment when kind of the facade breaks and all of a sudden they say, oh wait, I was a fly first generation low income college student too. And it's that moment kind of where the magic happens, and trying to explore how we can best integrate that into kind of our organizing. For example, you know, we were doing data analysis on the SNAP online purchasing pilot. There was so limited, really my virtual background here really wants to speak louder than I do right now. Thanks for bearing with me, guys. So at the outset of our SNAP online purchasing pilot work, no data out there on this program. There's not going to be necessarily a federal evaluation of this program. And we submitted public records requests to every single participating state to reveal trends in nationwide participation to help inform the equitable expansion of this program. And doubtless, kind of through this work, connected with partners and organizations working on this issue on the ground, and individuals just amongst our network trying to order some strawberries with Amazon Fresh, and like, it's not delivered in my zip code, or it's really hard to use this interface, or a $35 like delivery minimum. Wait, we've been like thinking about this problem at a high level public records request spreadsheet level, when the program itself is really inaccessible in so many important ways. Kind of one project that was born out of that was user-facing guides, guiding participants through SNAP online purchasing through visual and mobile walkthroughs. We're working to translate our guides into different languages and sharing them with our partners. And having had the opportunity to share that widely, have received over 40,000 views from SNAP participants across the US, reaching out to us and sharing their experiences with the guides, with SNAP, with food assistance generally, and trying to think about how best to incorporate those voices into not only like how we create our tool, but the fabric of our community is the next steps for our continued work on the SNAP online program.
Yeah, these are just so many absolutely amazing experiences, so much insight that we kind of have. I was kind of curious, you know, we know that there's issues within the system. If, you know, there's any different ideas of how we can balance the agriculture needs versus, you know, the population needs. Christine, if you have anything to speak on that.
Yeah, I actually was just on a group conversation on food waste. This is part of the UN sponsored food systems dialogues that are happening around the world. And it was 6 o'clock in the morning. It was in the afternoon for the Netherlands, but 6 a.m. for me. But we had some really great conversations about the supply chain and what food waste looks like. And something to share, especially with this conversation, as you are referring to like certain forces, right, that control how we get our food, is a huge element of food security. And so one thing to think about is the way we grow food. We actually don't consume the food that we grow here in California. We export a lot of it. And one example I've been giving is around the study that was done by UC Santa Barbara. Ventura County, heavily agricultural county, exports about 90% of their agricultural products outside of the state. So we actually only from Ventura County eat a few percentage of that locally. And when I talk about agriculture, we're talking about water resources, labor, like there's a lot of inputs to that. So thinking about how much water goes into celery and strawberries, and there are certain crops that are higher water content crops, and that's our natural resources exiting our state. And so people might pay for them as a commodity, but who's going to pay for the environmental impacts is the question. And so when COVID happened, a lot of people asked me about food waste because of people not having enough food, but then hearing the fact that farmers were throwing away milk, throwing away produce. I actually was not very concerned with the waste. I was more concerned about shortages. If we don't incentivize farmers to actually plant seeds and to grow food, then we won't have food. And so I think there is that level of consumer reality that is out of touch with farmers' realities and market realities. And so there's so much about the supply chain that's not balanced at all that we need to take note of. And when I spoke to folks in the Netherlands the other day, I also shared the fact that these global forces around our food supply chain makes it hard for us to think about local issues like hunger, food security, and just this notion of what it means to access food if the market is so unbalanced. And then on top of that, that economy for us as we're exporting things, we are also getting our foods from other countries. How are we impacting other countries' livelihoods and food security? And so I always question, and this is definitely from my social science training, is whose self-interest is this? And if we're getting food from other countries, how are they going to get their food? Who grows food for them? And so this is like a very vicious cycle of not actually knowing. And as much as I'm sharing right now, I don't know nearly enough as I should know. And so, how can we actually have these conversations that are data driven, but then also how do we sell this to the market powers that be to change their practices? And then one last example I'll provide, most of my work is in school nutrition. And when I ask school food service directors about how they procure, and one example is California schools will procure oranges from Florida. Florida schools will procure oranges from California. These are two very orange heavy states. Why are two orange heavy states selling oranges to each other? That doesn't make sense. It's like New York City selling apples to Washington State and Washington State doing the same. So there's just so many things about our food chain that are really much driven by the markets and not really driven by the people who need it the most. And so these are some issues with trends that could use better data analytics to improve purchasing power, but also to untangle this web that we've created for ourselves.
Coming into that conversation as an observer, the idea of simplifying the supply chain, and because profit is at the core of a lot of systems, and that is the main reason for shipping things to certain places or selling things to certain places, and it's not necessarily health comes first, it's usually profit comes first. A lot of these privatized systems have been created, and yet they're servicing public schools. So to me, it seems like the solution would be around making public data public and then figuring out a way to create additional supply chains that are either parallel to these private companies or either some sort of recommendation based on existing supply chains if we do make that data public. But I think as long as all of these systems are disparate, I don't see how that would happen.
I similarly just balk at the immensity of this challenge. And but also at the same time, it takes such a multi-stakeholder coalition to tackle a network of issues that comprise child nutrition and farm worker sovereignty and local sourcing in California and universal school meals. One just thing that has been so exciting to watch gain steam over the past year, thanks so much to advocacy led by organizations like LA Food Policy Council, is universal school meals in California and or nationally. Like there's a revolutionary bill moving forward in California that would expand free school meals for all students K through 12 universally, and right in there, local food sourcing from California farms. And that takes a coalition of farmers, of teachers, of food service directors, of data scientists, and of state policymakers that I don't think could come together around a smaller, less important and less urgent issue. And kind of to the question of the universe of like, how the heck is this tackled? Definitely not by one organization or one individual, but by people power. And I think that the pandemic has showed us a lot of things. And I don't want to use COVID-19 and silver linings in the same sentence, but one thing has just been when mutual aid and the kind of power of collective action can really move policy at so many levels, and like seeing that on school meals, it really reverberates. But also just taking that down to like a smaller level here, the project that it has been an amazing privilege to work with Hope on, and a whole cohort of our team and that with DataKind San Francisco, is a map of school meal sites in the Bay Area. We maintain the most up-to-date, accurate, every 2 weeks updated map of school meal sites serving the Bay Area, which then we source to No Kid Hungry, which populates their free meal finder map and texting hotline. And it's co-developed in partnership with school districts across the Bay Area, and a series of compensated user interviews with both their social worker staff and low-income Bay Area residents trying to access school meals. And both the stories of individuals just working through the system to obtain this great COVID-19 era resource, and then that thought in the back of your mind that so much of this could end once the pressure is off, is just such like a two-sided coin of like, what can we learn from the pandemic to bring to social services post-pandemic? I think is a big opportunity to put pressure on under an administration where stuff like this might be possible. So yeah, excited for vaccination rollout, nervous for things that have sunsets, but excited about the power of collective action to just like take on what otherwise just looks intractable.
Awesome. These really cool ideas. Just really kind of going off that idea of how do we keep, the steam rolling post-COVID. I'm interested from like a local government idea, Christine, how do you think we could, keep making that happen?
Yeah, there's a lot of really good models to think about, and we actually have created a lot of these models, but I also feel that one of the things to consider is, in addition to creating and passing models and policies, similar to the things that have been discussed, well, what happens after the policy has been passed? So a lot of the frustrations we actually feel about a lot of things right now, like school food, is because the system that is responsible for administering it from policy to practice is not equitable, is not just. With that in mind, the United States is actually one of the very few countries that federally funds school foods. And around the world, school food as a social benefit does not exist because of how costly it is. But we as a country in the 40s decided on a food program. And actually before that, there was a lot of local investments. in places like in Italy, for instance, they call them canteens. And a lot of the canteens are civically supported. So when we think about funding streams and models, there's so much to learn from. We are actually home to a lot of really great school nutrition programs, but unfortunately only the bad ones really make it into the news. And so how do we actually change the narrative to actually replicate great programming? One of the things I'm trying to spearhead is specifically how do we understand these best practices, adapt and scale them so that it works. Because we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We know we want good food. We know that in order to get it, we need a better process, better system. We need better funding. I think one thing to also keep in mind with all of the things that we're talking around policy is that social benefits are seemingly a social drain. It's a drain on the economy. If LA County, if anyone who qualifies for CalFresh actually applies to CalFresh, we would get $500 billion more in federal funding injected into the local economy. And so the rhetoric that I use is that there's CalFresh purchasing power. Usually you don't talk about these two things. And that's problematic. And when we have that constant deficit lens in viewing the cost of benefits, there's also the cost of hunger, the cost of learning loss, the cost of so many things that if we don't invest in our systems, we're not going to actually go to where we want to be. And it's this concept of, I like calling it understanding when you're talking about equity, thinking about equity, and when you're actually practicing it. And I feel like that's one of the problems for policy is we're constantly talking about accountability. And when really it gets translated into compliance. And so I differentiate that a lot in the work that we do, understanding when something is being compliant and when something is being accountable. Sometimes systems don't know the difference. You pass like a really great law, a really great policy, but then at the end of the day, it becomes a checkbox. And that's the process of inequity that happens when you don't actually see through the plan that the public has charged its government. And so that's when good intentions go wrong. And these are the pieces where advocacy fits in so well to keep folks accountable. And like I mentioned, being a fan of UX, how do we actually take that user experience that's so valuable in tech and apply it to social services? It makes sense to me, but unfortunately, people who get trained for policy and policy implementation work don't get that education. So there's a lot to be done, but I think first and foremost, having conversations and stories. I go back to that a lot. It seems so simple, but that's where I start.
Awesome. Yeah. Obviously, conversations like the ones we're having today are just so important for addressing and, continually tackling problems that keep coming up, such as food scarcity and food insecurity. So we are at around that 20-minute mark. So I'm going to start kind of filtering in some questions from the team or the people that are currently attending. So I currently have a question from Sylvia. So here it goes. There are so many major, systematic, prolific issues that you can only touch on, but perhaps a way to start to study this is to start at the endpoint, food getting thrown out. The issues we're talking about with school meals, flying oranges to Florida from California, don't matter when at the end of the journey, restaurant chains, supermarkets, homes throw out 30 to 40% of food. Can we talk about how to address that, or food redistribution?
Great question. So on the private side, there are startups who try to help supermarkets specifically predict what exactly they're going to need on the shelves and how much. And obviously there are buyers for stores, and this has been, since markets have been opened, there needs to be some sort of formula for what you put on the shelves. But applying data science to that problem is something that is kind of new in the space. And one of the companies doing that is a Seattle-based startup, Shelf Engine, and they reduce food waste. I mean, for restaurants, I imagine it's a little bit harder, especially during a pandemic, but for supermarkets where there are more consistent needs, there can be more consistency in how their models can be applied. And I think it's a great example of how data science is actually used for this problem. However, that is a private company. Markets and restaurants have to pay them. So who knows, if there's no guarantee that you're going to be able to decrease food waste in the same amount of how much you're paying for this service. So personally, I think it would be great if that could be something that is just a part of a company's, I guess, policies of like actually reducing food waste for the sake of it and not for profit margins. But of course, profit margins are going to be the driver for this. And Christine, I saw you unmute earlier. If you have some more policy specific or just in your field.
So I conducted a plate waste study in Milwaukee for the Milwaukee Public Schools Universal Free Breakfast in the Classroom program. I literally measured milk waste, cereal waste, and I created a study that actually ended up providing trends around what kids ate and what they threw away. And again, UX is some of my favorite places to start because when I went into a classroom where there were 4-year-olds, they have pre-K schooling in the Milwaukee Public Schools. To watch a 4-year-old try to eat a frosted mini wheat in 10 minutes is quite sad. That mini wheat is the size of their mouth. And so when you talk about waste, it's not the right cereal match for a 4-year-old. And most policymakers, even the school nutrition folks, are not going to recognize these things because who's watching a 4-year-old eat? They're like, well, they don't like it. It's like, no, they're trying, but you try being 4 years old and eating a frosted mini wheat. It's not going to happen. And so the foods that they did eat were like, and they're all generic brands, but I can't think of them right now, but Rice Krispies. Like, it's just so much easier for a 4-year-old to eat that. On the school lunch side, watching, again, I'm using the 4-year-old. So 4, 5, 6-year-olds eat a grilled cheese sandwich that hasn't been cut. They can't get past the crust. And so to eat a grilled cheese in 15 minutes is not going to happen either. So food waste is happening in such a way where people are not actually connecting the dots on why. And so when people think about, well, kids don't like this program or kids don't like this food, how are you going to know those things if you're not going to sit and actually experience a meal with them? And I believe in breaking bread. I believe whether you're having lunch with a 4-year-old or a 40-year-old, having meals really helps facilitate conversations, but that's when you actually start noticing these things of what works and what doesn't work. I don't think enough people take time. And I think that's a call to action for folks in the data world. Break your cycle or your norm of what you normally don't do and just figure out a new method to learn data. So as a mixed methods researcher, I'm also a multi-methods researcher. So how do you actually know the difference between when you're understanding your data at a multifaceted level and when you're taking your data for face value? And I think those are the challenges within the data world. We teach disciplines and we teach students how to collect and analyze data, but we also are very rigid in how we do those things. And so I'm a plan of interdisciplinary because of that. And knowing those differences. And one thing to share about my own educational experiences, I thought I was interdisciplinary, mixed methods, great. Then I realized I was interdisciplinary only in the social sciences until I started partnering and working with biologists and housing and hospitality people. Those are different mindsets and you're having different types of conversations and you think differently when you actually have those conversations. And so how do we understand these complexities if we are always in our silos, right? Because you can be interdisciplinary and still be siloed. So I just really appreciate being able to just sit with what the situation is and ask yourself, what's missing? Or ask somebody, am I missing something? So, because if it's your own fixed mindset, how do you go into that growth mindset so that you can be critical about the situation and not be in that siloed mindset?
I love that call to action, Christine, that visual of imagine a 4-year-old trying to eat a mini wheat in 10 minutes. I can't not imagine that now. And yeah, I'll take you up on that challenge. It's a hard visual to form. But I think an exciting part of this great question is creative and innovative ways of thinking about this, not as a problem, but kind of as a system with a potentially closed loop, and approaching this problem with an engineering mindset of in equals out. Food waste and skyrocketing rates of food insecurity does not make sense. And just efforts to close that loop through both policy, like SB 1383 in California, for example, is an amazing climate reduction bill that has a little thing in there about what can we do to close the loop with food waste that creates methane, and how can that be better routed, that food, that fresh available food be used to address food insecurity. And that just gets at your point, Hope, about how do we leverage public-private partnerships around mission aligned goals to both save valuable products and address food insecurity. And how do we reduce barriers to those partnerships that are already so rare? It's really hard to donate food as a store. And I'd be really curious to hear how organizing efforts around this manifest in LA, just speaking from very limited kind of anecdotal experience in the Bay Area, and just on campus, Stanford organizing of food recovery. It's really hard to donate fresh after 1-day delivery uneaten food that never reached kind of the serving line, that never left the kitchen. And just sometimes it's just that bureaucratic backlog of liability that prevents a huge resource from potentially closing the loop. So I also just wanted to kind of jump in there again with it's an interdisciplinary engineering mindset that kind of sees the holes in the system and works with all stakeholders to plug them up on these really complex challenges.
I'm going to zoom in on a very specific part of what you said, and also kind of zoom in and kind of move away from the systems in place. But there are local programs in some cities or some counties where you can register your fruit tree so that someone from the city or state can come harvest it, or anyone can look up a map of the trees in the area and know that it's free to pick it. Because I know last year I saw a neighbor whose apple tree, 80% of it just fell on the ground and rotted. And I'm gonna ask them if I can register their tree for them. But there's small things like that where it's local, hyper specific to your neighborhood, to your community, that I think folks just don't know that those exist. And it can, bridge small gaps and are still worth investing personal time in.
And so Hope, with that example of an organization picking fruit, we actually have one here called Food Forward. They do food rescue at farmers markets as well. So at the end of the market day, Food Forward will collect unsold produce, and they'll take the produce and they will have partnerships with different entities, and it will be part of a produce distribution type program. And so more of that has actually been happening during the pandemic. But there are programs out there. Actually, one of the things we did as the LA Food Policy Council was we actually operate 5 working groups, and one of them is food waste prevention and reduction. And so that particular work group was instrumental in creating a program within LA Sanitation called Recycla. And what will happen if, let's say you're a business and you have excess food, you can actually call LA Sanitation and they will pick up and the food, and then they'll take the food and they'll donate it to a pantry. So things like transportation, and Charlie, your example of like fresh produce, not having anywhere to go, right? Logistics is huge. And I think that's part of the problem as well, is not understanding things at that level of detail. It's almost like your haves and your have-nots, but where's the line that connects both things, right? So most people will think about the farmer and not differentiate a farmer and a farm worker, and not differentiating how a farm fresh product gets into a grocery store. And so there is that journey that our food goes through that us as consumers, we don't appreciate or understand. And one of my roles as the executive director of this organization is to connect these dots. And just to kind of provide a little bit of context, which I should have done earlier, but as a food policy council, what we do is we connect the dots. So farm to fork, our leadership is the public. We were made by and for Angelenos as the food policy council. So I lead the Food Policy Council as the executive director, but we're only the backbone of all of LA. So we work with so many different people to make sure that we're all on the same page. And that's one of the beauties of being able to connect the dots. We're not doing this on our own. And I also want people to know that they're not doing it on their own too. And sometimes it's interesting to hear people as they share their story. It's like, what can I do? I'm only a farmer. What can I do? I'm only a CalFresh recipient. And I feel like that's that mentality of who wants to hear my story? And it's like so many people do want to hear your story, but we don't know how to connect the dots enough to amplify those stories. And so I just love having conversations with so many people because I get to learn from everybody. And when sometimes I have these conversations, folks are like, oh, you don't want to know the details. I'm like, please tell me the details. I want to know the details. And so I have people just carry on about just administrative burdens. Like, please tell me your administrative burdens. I want to listen and hear. And so, no, that's boring stuff. I'm like, no, it's not boring to me. I am appreciative of those little details because those details are the things that don't get talked about. And those are the challenges or best practices, right? But they're hidden. And so how do we unhide them and really have really robust conversations to make sure that information does not go lost. And I think that's the other charge around data is what is the hidden data and how can we go beyond the numbers that we're trying to collect and really create space for data that's not planned, right? I feel like everyone creates this robust study and they're like, this is the data I'm going to collect. But what happens if you find data that doesn't quite fit your scope, right? And so I think all of those things are highly valuable, but we need to actually teach each other that they're valuable.
Awesome, really cool, amazing insights. We are kind of coming up at the end of our time that we have together. I do see, Lee, I believe, or Laitia is kind of wanting to discuss trust. And I'm sorry we weren't able to get to that necessarily in time, but I feel like we covered it a little bit already with our discussions of the food system and everything surrounding that. So basically, I want to end the session with asking the panelists kind of where viewers, attendees, could potentially connect with them. If there's any further discussions or questions or ways they want to help connect, where they could do that. So just
Well, mindful of the time and so grateful for your all joining in this conversation today. I guess I really just wanted to pop in with one final thought, kind of jumping on what you both had shared and the great questions in the chat of just like, what do we do? Big problems. Like just it's so powerful to show up with your story and to listen to stories. If that's the bravery of showing up to your representative and saying it was textbooks or food, and really just having that conversation that they've shown up for. And or if it's you're a technologist like designing a web app, look at Code for America that created a food stamp application you can go through in 10 minutes and has cute like visuals of ramen for students. Like it's so accessible. This isn't like Snap, it's not scary, it's stigmatized. It's like, oh, I've been eating ramen for 4 days, maybe I should apply for food stamps. I could use a little help. It's like organizers down at UCLA who are posting like selfie videos of like, here's me at the grocery store with my EBT card. Like it's personal and it's a story that we all share because we all have a relationship with food. If we love cooking with our family, if we love working in the garden, or if we got rejected from SNAP. And so I just so like thank all for the bravery who shared their questions and stories, and will continue to do so on behalf of these issues. And I'll share a link to the chat in the chat to our organization, which has means of reaching out to us. Would love to connect with everyone.
Yeah, and I'll share the link for DataKind SF, which is if you know any data scientists or data centric workers, DataKind SF basically uses data science to help other nonprofits. So I am currently on the Unbox project, but once our partnership is over, I'll be helping another great nonprofit. And like I mentioned, check out your local food banks, either donating or see what they need, volunteer your time, check out No Kid Hungry, and I'll post the DataKind SF link.
And for us at the LA Food Policy Council, we are your food policy council. So we have 5 working groups you can join, ranging from urban agriculture. So that working group, for instance, really focuses on things like food sovereignty. An urban lot can grow a lot of food. So I think people underestimate how much food can be grown in a small plot of land. It doesn't have to be acres and acres. It can just be your front yard. A big movement is food forests. How do you grow your own food in the very small spaces that you have? And this includes apartment spaces. So anything from policy to gardening to you name it, the Food Policy Council is here to organize and connect you to who and where you need to be, where you want to change the food system. And you can reach us on our website, goodfoodla.org, or you can email me directly. It's Christine@goodfoodla.org. So anything folks need, we are here for you, and I'll put our website in the chat as well.
Awesome. And one last thing, if you guys enjoyed this, we're going to be doing this a lot with the D4G community. I'll put the link down in the chat. So feel free, check it out, and we'll be hosting webinars like this going forward as well. You probably caught our previous ones as well. I just wanted once again to say thank you to all of our panelists for putting on this great discussion, and thank you all of you, the attendees, that make it worth our time.
Thanks, Stephen, for moderating.
So much.
Thanks, everybody.
I found my new look. Thanks for helping me find it. Landon.
As the sun was setting, I got dimmer and dimmer.
But did you get a 2-tone makeover? I don't think so.
I'm just impressed you stuck with it the whole time.
Yeah.
How to support the brand.
Owned it.
I know. Thank you so much.
I'm definitely going to connect with you all because we're actually working on a CalFresh project. So yeah, so.
Christina, I would love to connect.
Yeah, that'll be awesome. So it's called Fresh Ideas for CalFresh, and we're building out an ecosystem to actually connect the dots between the individual and policy. And it spells out the relationship across. So I would love for folks to participate. It's illustrated. So I've been working with a lot of cool creative folks. I have zines planned. I have a lot of just really cool things to just to destigmatize CalFresh. So and really make it accessible. We actually launched Community Chefs LA.